So you're controlling it there and not up top.
Yeah, give me 1 second.
Sorry.
I'm going to take a guess that our functionality all just magically came back on. But I'm going to let somebody verify that for us. Can somebody in studio, there should be like a few second lag here, but we had a glitch. Is somebody watching on Facebook or YouTube that would like to chat in and say, hey, we can see you now and we can hear you now? All right, I'm going to do something. We're back live, aren't we? I think what I need is for somebody in-house to make sure they're actually watching Facebook or YouTube. Yes, they all should be on now. Okay. As long as one is on, they're all on. All right, friends, thank you for your patience. What you're seeing is chaos on the set, and I'm going to take the hit for this one because we use a software program called Restream, which is amazing if you turn it on. So, if you don't turn on Restream, my entire audience is sitting out there watching a countdown clock not move or nothing. So, I apologize for that. That's me. My name is Joe Nesbitt, and the mistake is mine. So I just want to say thank you so much for being with us tonight for night 3 of Unchained with Pastor Richie Halverson. Last night, Pastor Jay was here with his guest, Jay Rosario. And I hope that you saw that the message that we are trying to communicate each night for 10 nights is that there is hope beyond your deepest valleys. That whatever the hurt, the hang-up, the heartache, or the habit is, that there is a hope beyond that. And so we have incredible guests each night. Our guest tonight is Karen McDougall. And Karen and I have been on a journey together for 7 years. Her husband is here, Bob McDougall. He's going to be on a little bit later for the Q&A. And friends, their journey is incredible. It's a testimony to God. It's a testimony to AA. Is that fair to say?
Yes, it is.
And we're going to explore that a little bit tonight. So I want to welcome you. Thank you for hanging in there while we solve that technical glitch. We appreciate you tuning in to night 3 of Unchained. That being said, let's go ahead and share some experiences with you. Thank you again for being here.
You're welcome.
Glad you're here. Could you tell us and tell the viewing audience a little bit about yourself, where your journey starts and some of the early history?
Sure. So I grew up in a Christian family, wonderful parents. I'm the youngest of 4 kids. And I attended Christian schools for 16 years. I grew up in an alcohol-free family. When I was like 17 years old, I was babysitting and was curious because in the refrigerator there was some alcohol. I thought, I wonder what that really is like.
Okay.
So I tried it, and it didn't taste good, but the way I felt was kind of incredible.
Okay.
And I said to myself at that moment, you need to not do this again, because it just seemed like it would be trouble for me.
All right. So there's no propensity for it in the family. This is something this is not what they do at home.
Right.
But that was there, and that was your first experience with it.
Yes.
That was where that crossed paths with your life.
Yes.
So you go from that point. At what point, because you said, hey, this isn't something I should do again.
Well,
where did this show up again? How did you and that cross again?
A couple of times in college, not a lot. But when I left college, I had a degree in music education, and I moved to a new city where I didn't know anyone, which is kind of interesting because Massachusetts is not a very big state, and musicians kind of know one another. And I knew people who knew people, but I didn't have any friends there. And I moved into an apartment all by myself and started my journey as a teacher, which I was excited about, but I was really scared.
Sure.
A little bit lonely, being in a new place. And I happened to meet up or be taken in by this family who had invited me out for dinner. A few of their kids were at the school, so they had invited me out for dinner. Well, they all drank.
Okay.
And they said, "You don't drink?" And it's like, "Well, I have." And it's like, "Well, you just haven't had the right thing." So
Okay.
that's where it picked up again.
So a social aspect to it, not necessarily anything else at that point, but hey, the group of people that I'm hanging out with are doing with it.
Right.
That's what they do. And okay, let's do that.
Right.
Okay. Where did this take a turn when you thought, I'm headed in a different direction now with this? I'm no longer, say, avoiding it like my household did or my home did, but I'm welcoming it.
It was a difficult situation because if the school knew, I would have lost my job immediately
Okay.
because it was a Christian school. So right from the get-go, I really never drank socially. I might have been in a social situation there where I was drinking, but everything had to be a secret. So
Okay.
in looking back, it was trouble from day one.
Right.
I really was not a social drinker in any way, shape, or form.
Okay.
I pretended that I was at that point, but it really progressed rapidly for me.
At this point, is Bob McDougall in the picture at all?
No,
So we're long before Bob here.
right?
All right. This progresses then.
It did. So I was keeping it to weekends, then it became Sunday night as well. And then it started to become one of those things where it was really hard to get going in the morning because if I was hungover, I had to go teach. And
Okay.
just a little bit in the morning might help a little.
Right.
And in the end, which was only a little more than a year and a half later, I was actually, I'm not proud to say, taking alcohol to school with me in a Snoopy thermos and putting it in the closet.
Okay.
And one morning when I got to school near the end of my career there, one of the pastors from a local church was there bringing his children in, and he said, "If I didn't know you better, I would say you were out drinking all night. You look awful today."
Wow. So hitting really close to home,
Yes.
but without the certainty.
Right.
Okay.
So that made my heart stop a little bit. And I was scared because I realized that other people were starting to see something was wrong.
There's something's giving things away.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Does it go beyond this? I mean, how deep does that valley go?
Very deep. It went very deep for me. So eventually, everything came out. Everything. And my life was a complete shambles at that point. I was pretty good at saying, "Hey, how are you?" "Good, I'm fine, I'm fine." Everything was always fine.
Right.
One of my friends after that point that I had gotten to know me while I was still drinking, and she said, I always knew something was off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but you were just too fine.
Always.
I was always too fine. But, I was a performer, so I was used to getting up front.
Right.
I had, it's what I did. So you just, did what you needed to do. And when everything came out, it wasn't just the drinking, but it was my relationships and the trust that people had placed in me, the betrayal of the kids that I cared deeply about, and the families. I had ruined everything.
Okay. So this was no longer something that's quiet.
It wasn't fixable, and it was not quiet.
Okay. How does this corner turn? How do you go from into complete shambles to remotely heading towards something different?
So I should mention that right before everything went to shambles and became known, I was introduced to Bob on a blind date.
Okay, so things in your life, when you meet Bob, who is just off camera here, folks, you'll see him in a couple minutes. Just before you meet him, you're still fighting this.
Oh, yeah.
This has still got you more than you have it.
Yes. And I made a decision the day I met Bob, this has to stop, because this is the man that I need to marry right here.
That's impressive.
I knew, but somebody else stopped it before I did.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to be laughing because I'm
Sure.
taking it in a trivial manner. It was, I can't begin to describe that's a nervous laugh.
No, I understand.
I can't begin to describe the complete and utter despair in my life at that time. I don't think you can really help another person understand what total despair is like.
All right,
But
and
I was experiencing total despair.
quietly, Bob doesn't know.
Not at
You're-
first.
Okay, so this is you seeing something new on the horizon and realizing, in order for me to head in that direction, this has to stop.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Did you go it alone at that point? You see it, you make the decision that this is not healthy, and tell me if I'm overstepping in my words here.
Not at all.
Where did you reach out to, or is this a cold turkey thing? Is this let me find somebody?
Well, I felt like I could certainly do it, because I had done it 10 times before, you know.
Okay.
I'm
Right.
going to quit. And so I did for a week or a few days, and then, you know. Miraculously, and I don't use that term lightly, the person, one of the people that I taught with, Beverly, her daughter worked at a hospital in town where they did addictions work.
Okay.
So she was an x-ray tech, but she had taken all the courses for counseling, alcoholism counseling, and gotten certified as that because she was often the first person people saw when they came to the hospital,
Interesting.
since she was doing x-rays, and she needed to be more equipped to know what to do.
Okay.
So that's when she really came into my life, Sharon, and my friend Beverly that I taught with, her mom, was like, you know, we can get past this, we can do this.
So she believed that
She
change
believed.
was possible.
She believed change was possible. But it just kind of kept going from bad to worse,
Okay.
you know.
Even though you have the right people with the
So-
right information, things are still headed.
They're still going downhill
Okay.
rapidly. And I realized I was not going to be working again there or at another Christian school for at least a very long time.
Until something changes
Until something
with that problem
drastically
set.
changed.
Okay.
Not just from the drinking, but from my whole lifestyle at that point. It was really a mess. Everything was a mess. So when you
Okay.
when you are a visible person, a musician, and you've been up front your whole life, you know, a lot of people know who you are.
Yes.
And they may not know you, but they know who you are.
Right.
So in my mind, I remember distinctly thinking, there's never going to be a day in my life that I will not hear about this or think about it or have somebody talking about it. Certainly not just my drinking, but my relationships, which were really bad.
This is going to follow me and haunt me.
It's never going
There's,
to end.
this is the thought
Never.
process. This is inescapable.
Never.
But is that a true thought?
No.
Did it? Okay.
But emotions aren't always logical.
Right.
But the other part of that despair was thinking that I knew better. Since I had been raised as a Christian, I knew better than to have gotten involved in everything I was involved in.
So you're beating yourself up.
Yes. And
Okay.
that I was firmly believed that there was no way that God could forgive me for what I had done.
What?
That was my despair.
God's out of the picture then, because you're thinking he's written me off because of what I'm doing, and I have
I
a
did
public.
it willfully. Nobody made me.
I chose it, and I have done this publicly, and so is it fair to say you were feeling completely isolated, surrounded by
did.
people, and
I was surrounded by people, clearly, who loved me and cared about me. My family surrounded me. My friend Beverly and you know, her husband Joe and Sharon and, you know, and several other people, my friends from college, that absolutely surrounded me. And were like, you know, we can get past this. I was not alone, but in my head, I knew that they didn't understand what I understood. What I understood was that nobody forced me into this. I got myself into this mess, and I couldn't get myself out. And how could I expect to go to God and ask Him to get me out when I really knew better?
do you think that there are people out there on that same journey now?
Yeah.
If you're speaking to them as we're sitting here tonight, what can you share with them about how did you escape from that thought process? God's God doesn't have me.
Yeah.
People don't have me. Where does the light shine into this darkness?
Well, it didn't at first. So at first, there was absolutely no way out for me. So I'm not proud of any of what I'm saying. The only reason I would say any of this tonight is to just say how God delivered me.
Right.
So I actually tried to overdose one night, and I took enough to kill a few people. And I woke up with this terrible headache, screaming into the phone, I don't know, and I'm like, what is going on? And someone was on the phone with me.
Interesting.
turned out to be the principal of my school. And he had helped me move to this apartment, but couldn't quite remember where it was. And I hadn't called him. I knew that. And so anyway, he found my apartment and realized I was in a lot of trouble and took me directly to the hospital. As it turned out, it was the only hospital in the entire area that could treat my particular overdose.
Wow.
And God saved my life that night. And what we found out later was that it was a long distance call. I lived in Rhode Island, he was in Massachusetts. And he had his wife on the phone with me saying, don't go to sleep, while he's trying to drive around, find me.
Right.
And their phone bill and my phone bill never reflected a phone call that night.
That's miraculous.
It was miraculous. That's the only reason I share that part of my story, because it's a painful part to share, but at the same time, I know there are many people who've been through addiction who have had this happen,
Right.
And I'm so grateful that God saved me. At the time, I wasn't so sure what to think, to be honest with you. So I was in the hospital, and I had this doctor who came in and said, every day he'd come in and say, I just want you to know that you should not be alive. I want you to know that. And he would leave.
Interesting.
Every day he would come and tell me that until I was discharged.
So he recognized that there's something else going on here
Yeah.
because of what was a certain medical outcome was not happening.
Right.
You were going to walk out, and that shouldn't have happened.
Should not have.
What kind of changes did you have to make going forward from that hospital bed forward? What kind of changes did you make, or addressing our audience as well, when they're in a situation they've hit that point, what are the first steps forward?
So I felt like I was in a pit, and the more I dug to get out, the deeper I went. And I kept thinking, maybe the dirt would pile up and I could climb out,
Okay.
but it just wasn't happening. My brother called me that one night after that and said, it's like you've tipped over a big dump truck full of gravel, and you can't just throw it all back in. You kind of
Right.
have to go in one piece at a time.
Long
I hated
process.
those answers.
Right, because it's saying this was a long process in, it's going to be a long process out.
Right.
One
and
step
I
at
wanted
a
to
time.
fix it right now.
Right.
So what I had to change was everything. I started going to AA, and I looked at this, when I started going to AA, it was 1980. Yeah, so I'm that old, right? So
I was there.
Yeah, I know. So when I went, there were no women's meetings. There were no non-smoking meetings.
Okay.
There were no young people's meetings. You were a bunch of people thrown into this room together, and I walked in there, and there was nobody close to my age at all. I was clearly the youngest one there. I realized pretty early on that I might be the only one with a college degree. I had a really hard time thinking of who to get for a sponsor, because I'm like, well, I'm smarter than they are. What can they get to teach me?
Okay.
So I still had that.
How do I connect with these?
I couldn't. I didn't even drink coffee. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So they're drinking coffee, they're smoking. We're in the church basement, and you couldn't see for the smoke. And I'm like, I told my friend Sharon, I'm going to die of lung cancer here, but I might get sober. I don't know. So it was like, it was a different world.
Sure.
And they would tell you, now don't talk about these certain things, because that wouldn't be appropriate in this group. But it's like they didn't have a group that would be that appropriate.
They were trying to avoid landmines for
They
people.
were trying to help. And I couldn't identify for anything. And Sharon went night after night after night. She went with me, and she was like, there is no bad meeting. The bad meeting is the one you don't go to. You
Wisdom.
just keep going. And so I did. Eventually I started going on my own, and eventually they started having a women's non-smoking meeting that was like 40 minutes away, and I was thrilled to drive to it. But the first time I went to that, I'd only been sober a few months, and I started to philosophize about something, and the person in charge of the meeting said, you're just barely sober. You should probably just be quiet and listen for a while. And it hurt my feelings.
Exactly. I'm not coming back here.
But she was right. She was 100% right.
To
And-
just be calm and stop verbalizing.
And listen.
And listen.
Learn.
Yeah.
So I wasn't choosing a sponsor. So someone came to me who had very few teeth and said, I'm going to be your sponsor. And I was like, okay. And so she said, and you need to do what I tell you to do, and if you do, you will get sober. And she told me her journey, which was nothing like mine. So it just like felt like it was making this big chasm, between us. But something inside of me was like, look, nobody else is volunteering to take you on. You need to take hold of this. So I did. So
You chose belief in her.
yes. I
Even
did.
though the commonality didn't seem to be there,
It
you're
did
like,
not. And she was
fine.
not of my faith at all and didn't understand, why it was such a big deal to me that I was in a Christian school and had done this all. And, it's like, well, we've
Right.
we've all been to the places like that. So this is what, it's like, no, you haven't. In my head, I'm saying, no, you haven't. No, you
Yeah.
haven't. So we were looking at the steps, and I'm looking at the steps up on the wall. Every AA meeting has the 12 steps, and the first one, you're powerless over alcohol. You admitted that you're powerless over alcohol and that your life has become unmanageable. Okay, so I'm like, okay, yep, I got that one, check. And the second one, came to believe that a power greater than yourself can restore you to sanity. Yeah, I got that, except I can't, well, yeah, I guess I was insane. Okay, yep, got number 2. So the third one was that you made a decision to turn your life and your will over to the care of God as you understood him. And that was like, oh, that made me pause. And without ever telling my sponsor that, she gave me an assignment and said, for the next month, I want you to read in this 12-step book the whole chapter on step 3 every single day.
Wow.
And I was like, not step 1 or step 2. No, I want you to read step 3 every day.
Hit that
And
nail over
yes,
and over.
Yes. I think she was tired of hearing me whine because I was in a lot of self-pity at that point.
The turning over portion wasn't happening.
No. Actually, she was telling me that it was a reverse pride, that it was almost a reverse pride in holding on to that guilt and shame.
Okay. You're not even letting yourself be unchained.
No.
You're holding yourself there. Okay. And she's calling you on
And
it.
I'm trying to stay sober by just gritting my teeth and clenching my fists and saying, I can do this, I can do this. And I would stand there and looking out my window some nights just saying, God, help me to just stay sober, help me to stay sober. And then I'd drink again, So like even while going to AA, I'd start to drink again, and then I'd stop, and then I'd start, and then I'd stop, and it was just feeling so hopeless. So finally I started to read that. And every day it started to make more sense. At first it hurt my feelings because I'm like, okay, I don't need to read it every single day to understand what step 3 is about.
Right.
But I did. And it was an amazing transformation for me. And so one night she was driving me home, which was only, a mile from there. And we're in the car and she said, I don't know what kind of God you serve, but my God says that when you ask for forgiveness, that's why he died on the cross and he forgave. And for you to not let him do that is basically just telling him he's a liar.
Interesting. And what?
I was shocked.
Right.
I was totally shocked, but she was absolutely right. She hit the nail on the head. I'll thank her for the rest of my life for that night.
Tearing something open to reveal the truth of what's going on.
Yeah. And that was the turning point.
Okay. That you had to let yourself go, in a sense. I forgive me.
I had to surrender.
Okay.
And I wanted to do something so badly, but there was nothing. I've already done enough. I had messed things up enough. There was nothing more for me to do. I had to completely surrender and trust God to take that over for me.
Is it overly simplifying things to say God at that point was no longer your co-pilot?
Oh no, he was not. He was my pilot for sure. He
Yeah.
had to be the pilot. I couldn't do it.
Right. So you turn that corner. Step 3 becomes this step. I have to turn this over. What steps are you taking then between then and now? How many years have you and Bob been married now?
We have been married 38.
Awesome. 38.
In another week, 38. That's why I had to think for a minute. 38.
38 years.
Yeah.
Okay. And for that turning point occurs at what point in your guys' relationship?
Okay.
And we can follow up more on this in some of the Q&A.
I told him, right, when everything was really getting bad, I knew that everybody was going to know a lot of stuff, and it might be true and it might not. So we went out to eat at a restaurant, and I had like this total anxiety attack, but I said, I want to tell you everything. I don't want you to ever hear from anybody else something that I didn't tell you first.
You front it.
I
Bob, this is what's going on.
because some people had called my parents before I ever got to them,
Wow.
and that made it hard.
Absolutely.
I decided this one, I want to own it, and whatever happens will happen, but I don't want him, it's not fair for him to hear from someone else.
Right.
It wasn't fair for me or for him, and I wanted him to know. I figured if we had any chance whatsoever, if God was in us meeting in any way, shape, or form,
Right.
we needed to start with honesty. And I told him everything.
Apparently,
Yeah.
he took it okay.
Well, he did. He said, well, it's going to take some time. And I was like, well, I've been sober for 2 weeks. And he started to laugh. And,
That's fantastic.
but he was right. I needed time.
Right.
I did need time. I needed time to really become sober and not just stop drinking.
More than 2 weeks.
Yes, more than 2
More
weeks.
than 2 weeks. What advice would you have for someone out there who is, say, they recognize the problem, but they haven't hit that turning point yet? What advice could you give them that might give them a sense of, hey, this is possible? You had that one person that stepped into your life and said, this is possible. What could you offer to them?
In the midst of all the despair, nothing seems possible. And being able to do that yourself isn't going to happen. There are people who have done that who don't believe in God. I still believe it's totally the grace of God that they were able to achieve sobriety in any way, whether they accept that or not. And I believe strongly that AA is a God-given program, that the plan of salvation is really laid out in the 12 steps. It took time for me to understand that, but I really believe that strongly. But if God could forgive Peter or David or any number of the stories in the Bible of people who had really not done so well in their lives, then certainly he could forgive me for what had happened. And it may take time to feel that in your heart, to feel that forgiveness. It might take time, but feelings aren't reliable. And if I keep believing, God lets those feelings follow in time. And it just has to be one little small step at a time and one day at a time.
I appreciate that. Friends, that's probably the heart of this, isn't it? One small step at a time.
Very.
Don't go for the microwave, I need this now. But the version that says, let me turn this over and let me just take those incremental steps. Karen, thank you so much for sharing. We're going to come back in just a few minutes with your husband, Bob. We're going to ask some of your questions. We're going to ask some of our questions too.
Okay.
But thank you so much for sharing hope.
You're welcome.
Thank you for being part of Unchained.
Thank you.
Friends, we're going to let you listen to Pastor Richie Halverson too. He's going to share some of the things that Karen's talking about, and he's also going to share hope. You're going to hear that every night until this series finishes, that there is hope beyond those hurts, heartaches, habits. Friends, here's Pastor Richie Halverson.
Welcome back to Unchained, Hope and Healing from Addiction. So far in our journey, we've seen how life can possess you. All kinds of demons. People have debt problems, and they've got money problems and anger problems, and you name it. We all have problems. But the importance of getting honest about those problems is where the journey of recovery can begin. Once I got honest about my addiction, that's when I started being able to get into the solution and what I could do for that problem. So once we can finally admit the problem, that's when we're able to get into the solution. I've often heard the first 3 steps of the 12 steps summed up like this. I can't, right? That's the honesty part. That's the problem. I can't do it. I can't stop. He can. That's the hope. That's the belief that someone bigger than us can help us. And then the third step is, I think I'll let him. So I can't, he can, I think I'll let him. And once we start to identify and get honest about the problem, that's when we are able to gain some freedom. One day I was reading Mark's gospel and I ran into an interesting verse that just really jumped out at me. In Mark 6:5, it says that Jesus could do no mighty work there. It jumped out at me because Jesus was always doing mighty works and miracles. In fact, right before this, Jesus brings someone back from the dead. So, the question is, and why it jumped out at me, is why could Jesus not do any mighty work here? Well, let's do a little bit of background. Matthew 13:58, it says, because of their unbelief. Friends, we've got to believe that our solution is bigger than our problem. We've got to believe that God is bigger, that God's power is bigger than our weakness, that His forgiveness is greater than anything that you may have done or any sin you may have committed. Hebrews 11:6 says, whoever would draw near to God has to believe that He exists and that He rewards those who seek Him. So we won't even come to a power greater than ourselves if we don't believe He can help us. And so that's where belief comes in. You can't have a breakthrough and live an unchanged life without belief. In Matthew 17:18 through 20, it says, Jesus rebuked the demon and it came out of him. Right? We looked at that in the first session. The boy who was healed instantly. And then the disciples came. Jesus privately said, why could we not cast him out? And He said to them, because of your little faith, your little belief. Does the size of your hope match the size of your problem? Luke 18:25, it says, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God. And so what Jesus is doing here is He's comparing salvation to an impossibility. A camel can't go through the eye of a needle. It's going to take a miracle, basically, for a rich person to be saved. Now, often we assume Jesus is saying that it's extra hard for rich people to be saved. That is not what Jesus is saying. But during this time and place, people falsely believed that prosperity, that wealth was a sign of God's love and providence. And that's why when Jesus says it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to be saved, people are like, wait a second. You know, if it's impossible for good people, because they thought anybody who had prosperity and wealth, they were the good saved people. If it's impossible for good saved people, what hope is there for us? But then Jesus gets to the solution in verse 27. He says, what is impossible with us is possible with God. You know, I can't, He can. It's impossible for a drug addict to stop using. But you see, what is impossible for us is possible for God. It is impossible for some of us to stop going to that website, but what is impossible for us is possible for God. It is impossible to forgive someone who may have hurt you or abused you, but what is impossible for us is possible for God. I know we all know those people. For some people, it seems like to be nice. Come on, that's going to take a miracle. But hallelujah, what is impossible for us is possible for God. Our impossibilities are opportunities for God to show off His abilities. You have to believe that something can happen. You have to believe that there is something stronger than you are that can restore you to life and to sanity. Mark 9:23, all things are possible for the one who believes. And so basically, you got to have hope. You got to believe something can happen. According to Mark 6:1, the place where Jesus could do no mighty work, I find it interesting that it is His hometown. The people that were the closest to Christ had the hardest time believing in Christ. Jesus said a prophet is honored everywhere except in his own hometown and among his relatives and among his own family. Have you noticed the hardest miracles to believe in are the ones closest to home? You know, we can believe a stranger on TV can change, but with our own family, oh, no, they'll never change. They'll always be that way. Sometimes it's hard to have hope in a neighborhood that we've always lived in a dysfunctional home we grew up in. It's hard to believe in a miracle with the people we work with and the spouse maybe we live with. It's hard to believe in a miracle with the familiar because all we've ever seen is dysfunction. It can be hard to believe that something can happen differently. And often people think, well, yeah, but Jesus was different. I mean, He was the Son of God, right? No. Jesus, this is what's so cool about the gospel. This is one of the most beautiful, fundamental, important realities of the gospel, and that is Jesus was not exempt from his own rules. He was, is, and always will be one of us. So if you've ever been ostracized by your family, well, so was Jesus. Have you been rejected by friends, talked about, laughed about? So was Jesus. In John 1:11, it says, he came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. You see, they couldn't believe that a miracle, the miracle of the Messiah, could show up in their town, in their time, in their family, and in their lives. And let's be real, often we don't believe a miracle can happen in our town, our family, and in our lives. Nathanael, one of the disciples, when he hears about Jesus, he makes this statement, he didn't believe anything good could come out of Nazareth. Think about that. The greatest good to ever live came from a place no one believed anything good could come out of. And what's interesting about that is, according to John 21:2, Nathanael, the guy who says, can anything good come out of Nazareth? That guy, he lived and was from Cana. Well, Cana was Nazareth's neighbor. So Nathanael can't believe anything good can come out of something so close. Maybe you've heard about God changing other people's life, but you don't believe he can change your life. You know what? Hey, maybe you've heard about God, but you don't even know if you believe in a God. That's okay. If you can just believe a little bit, if you can just open yourself up to this idea that, you know what, maybe there is someone stronger than me, outside of me and my insanity, that can restore me to a better way of life. Because friends, if you can believe it, I promise you God can do it. And if Jesus could come out of Nazareth, something good can come out of your bad situation. Something good can come out of your life. If Jesus could break through the history of Nazareth, Jesus can break through your family history too. Stop telling God what he can and cannot do. Stop telling him who he can and cannot save. Let me tell you, if God rescued me from opiate addiction and continually, daily, continues to change my life, then he can do it for you. John 7:5 says, not even Jesus' brothers believed in him. Those that were the closest to the miracle missed it the most. Mark 3:21 says that when his family heard it, they went out to seize him, for they were saying, this guy is out of his mind. Now, this word for seize means to control. And so Jesus' own family tried to come between him and his plan. Don't let anything come between you and God's plan for you. Don't let someone else's lack of belief get in your way. Don't let the chain of someone else's dysfunction hold you back. Mark 6:6 says Jesus kept on teaching. So even though this town, he could do no mighty work there, Jesus didn't get discouraged. He didn't give up. He just kept on teaching. Maybe you've tried to quit 1,000 times. Keep on trying. Maybe you tried to pray 1,000,000,000 times. Keep on praying. Keep on hoping. You may have gone to treatment 12 times already. Give it another try. If you want God to do a mighty work in your life, then you have to believe that God can do it. You got to believe that a miracle can actually happen. Regardless of how bad the situation may look, if you can believe it, there is a power that can set you free from the dysfunction or the addiction in your life. There's this neat story in the Bible where the father of an epileptic brings his son to Jesus. Mark 9:23-24, Jesus says to him, if you can believe, all things are possible to the one who believes. And in verse 24, immediately the father of the child cried out and said, I believe, help my unbelief. So he believed a little bit, but you know what? All he's ever known is his son who had a condition, who had an ailment, who had a struggle. All he knew was the problem. That's what he had only known. His son was born with this condition, and so that's all he knew. So he had a little belief, but he had a little bit more unbelief. And so he recognized, he got honest. You know what? I think I believe a little. Help my unbelief. If you just have enough belief to open yourself up to something new, There is a power that can restore you to sanity. I had recently been kicked out of a halfway house. This was towards the end of my addiction. I was living in my car. I had been in and out of treatment. I was on the verge of giving up. I couldn't go home for obvious reason. My wife couldn't trust me. My family couldn't trust me. Nobody could trust me. And I remember I was there living out of my car, and I had the opportunity to go to treatment. I had recently, the county sheriff had told me I had another warrant for my arrest, and that after Christmas I should turn myself in, because it was actually Christmas Eve. That I should probably turn myself in because after Christmas, because I was going to be going away for a little while. And so I had the opportunity of going to treatment, and I thought, well, go to jail, treatment, I think I'll go to treatment. And so I went to treatment, and I had been to treatment so many times before. I felt cursed. I felt like nothing was going to change. But I'll never forget it when I was in my car there, and I just felt completely spiritually, emotionally, mentally bankrupt. In the darkness, I heard God say, look, just believe. Just believe enough to try again. And I said, just like that father, I believe, but help my unbelief. And the little belief I had to give it another try was enough belief for the miracle to take place in my life. And that's when I started working that process of recovery, and my life began to be unchained from the addictions that I had dealt with for years. In 1 Corinthians 15:7, it says, after Jesus' resurrection, he appeared to James and then to all the apostles. Now, there are a number of people in the Bible named James, but most people agree that this is Jesus' brother, which gives me hope. Because the same person that John 7:5 says didn't believe in Jesus, now believes in Jesus. He begins his letter in James 1:1. He says, James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ. So the same one who didn't believe in Jesus now believes in Jesus, and a miracle is taking place. He's unchained from his unbelief. According to the Jewish historian Josephus, in AD 62, a mob takes James, the brother of Jesus, to the top of the temple. They want him to renounce his belief, his faith, the same guy who used to not believe in Jesus, to give in, to give up. But James looks out, and it's recorded in history that he says, why do you ask me about the Son of Man? He dwells in heaven at the right hand of the mighty power, and he will come in the clouds of heaven. He did not renounce his belief. No longer is he chained by hopelessness and fear. He's no longer chained by closed-mindedness. Belief has opened a door to a new reality. Where once no mighty work could be done, now a miracle is taking place. Belief has broken through the paralyzing chain of James' unbelief. Hope has broken through hopelessness. And that's why James is the one who writes, but let me ask in faith, without doubting. For the one who doubts is like the wave on the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial. For when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. Stop putting limitations on God's power. Stop getting in the way of your miracle. Don't let doubt and unbelief stop you. What is impossible for you is possible for God. Look at James, the brother of Jesus. Man, if the kingdom of God could show up in his time, in his town, in his home, in his brother, then the kingdom of God can arrive in your time, in your town, in your home, and in your life.
Welcome back. That's a powerful message by Pastor Richie, isn't it? Now, it's interesting because he just mentioned something about asking in faith without doubting. But in the journey that we're on tonight, there's room for some doubts. And I want to ask our guest, and you're seeing now Bob McDougall and Karen McDougall. And I'm Joe Nesbitt if you just tuned in, and we've been exploring what it means to come through a really big valley with alcohol and then out the other side toward health. And the word that Pastor Richie mentioned there, when he's saying faith and not doubting, in the journey that you and I were talking about kind of in between there, you mentioned that there's some places in there where maybe the people supporting you might have doubted a little bit, hey, am I really being helpful or not? Do you want to comment a little bit more on that?
Sure. Um, it was a hard time for my friends and family that I learned more over time. Um, I know that our friends who introduced Bob and I, Sherry and Kevin, were very supportive. I was at their home the night before that awful day of my overdose. And I know that it probably felt like they didn't do enough or understood enough. But whatever people do to help at a time like that maybe is not enough, but it's not their fault that it's not enough. And it's important for people to still intervene.
They're 100% committed. They're 100% invested in trying.
And it's not the wrong thing.
Right.
I was so convinced that I was beyond hope. But the fact that they took a step to try to be there for me anyway has always been so meaningful to me. And the others, there were many others. I shouldn't start saying names, but there were
Sure.
many.
So you're kind of indicating that it's better for people to be involved, even if the results don't turn out like they think they should, because the message that's being sent to the person going through the valley is still one of support?
Yes.
Okay. So be present. Don't
run.
Don't run. Don't run.
But if you need to, it's okay. And I would,
Right.
because not everybody can be there. But if you can be, don't run for the reason of being afraid you're going to do it wrong.
Right.
Because if you come in a loving way and in an understanding way, God can use your efforts.
Be present.
Yes.
Communicate. Bob, you've been on the journey now. Karen said as we were starting the interview tonight that she kind of fronted things in the beginning. This is where I'm at. And she said that a lot of people were there believing in her the whole way. Can you tell our audience a little bit about what it's like to be the partner who believes while they're journeying through this, before the turning point?
Well, first of all, our first date, which was with Kevin and Sherry, when she left to go home, I saw her and I said, "That's the lady I'm going to marry."
That's the lady I'm going to marry.
That was 5 years. They never thought we were going to get married, but I think the thing I appreciated the most about Karen is how she was upfront.
She was owning this.
She was owning it, and you've got to understand, I've come from a intercity. Most of my friends, they had either alcoholic parents or single moms, and so it wasn't a surprising thing.
Okay.
But I knew she's a good person, and with her being honest and upfront with me, I said, "So we'll do this journey.
We'll do this together."
Yeah. And I didn't, some people might have said, "Oh, see you later,"
Right.
But I saw a beauty in her that I wanted to keep going forward with.
To keep the conversation going.
Right.
It's a God thing.
Yes,
A
it
God
was.
thing.
Yeah.
So you see him believing in you. Even before the turning point, you front it and he doesn't run. What does that do what message is that communicating to you? How is that helping as you're thinking about the way out of this?
It helped a lot. I didn't know where we would land or where it would go ultimately. I had hopes, but I didn't know.
Sure.
He didn't share that part of his thoughts with me at that time.
Let's just do the journey. Let's
Yes.
not worry about the end yet, but let's be together
He
now.
was very cautious. He didn't date exclusively and told me that. He was
Sure.
upfront as well because he was scared too.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
he didn't stop dating me either. And that was okay. I needed that time, and it was always there, just knowing that somebody believed to that extent was
To
very
believe enough to stay near.
to stay near.
We had long conversations.
Very long conversations.
I think with scenarios, I think we did every scenario you could possibly have in a lifetime.
If this happens, this.
Yeah.
If that happens, that.
Because during my 20s, the last thing I wanted to be was married. I wanted to have my race cars. I wanted to have my business. I wanted to have my own house. And but
So he wasn't ready either.
I was
Okay. So you tell your friends, that's the lady I'm going to marry. It's 5 years before that ever happens. But in that 5 years, this is where the turning point, and this is where the steps into the light away from this start happening, right?
I think, one thing I always tell young men when they're dating, don't even think about getting married until it's your best friend first.
Okay.
He was my best friend for probably 2 or 3 years.
You find that best friend, and then you start.
You have to have that.
Okay.
You can have love, but you have to be best friends. A best friend, a good best friend, will say, "Joe, you're doing this wrong."
They're going to confront
They're
you
going to confront you.
because love
It's
confronts.
honest, and it's honesty.
So I'm sitting here as a pastor, and we're doing the interviews to an audience. There's Christians and non-Christians listening and tuning in, but I'm a pastor, and you said something earlier that I want to come back to.
Okay.
Raised in a Christian household, alcohol is no part of that. And yet, one of the keys to your success isn't praying more, praying harder, but there's a recognition God's in it, but there's a value to the AA.
There is. And, another thing that just made me think of is that my sponsor said to me as well, you need to stop asking God to make you stop drinking, and instead ask him to take away the desire to drink.
The root source.
Yes.
Don't keep cutting branches off the tree, go for the roots.
You're asking for the wrong thing.
Okay.
And it resonated with me immediately. But interestingly, it took me about 2 months to pray that prayer.
Call
some
me out if I'm
reason-
saying the wrong thing. Surrender is hard.
It was really hard.
Turning this whole thing over.
Some of it felt good that it was so hard to do,
Sure.
that I was staying sober and I worked so hard. And
Pat,
yeah.
right?
And yet when I prayed that prayer, I can honestly tell you, with all the things I've been through in my life and in our lives and with raising our kids and the whole life happening, from that moment I prayed that prayer, I have never had a desire to drink.
Amen.
And I pray every day that God will continue to give me that blessing, because I know if I went back, things would take up where I left off and it would be worse than ever. I can't fool myself with that.
Right. So is that something that you would feel comfortable, as we're thinking about this whole process tonight of overcoming and coming out on the other side of this journey, to go to the root source is important?
Yes. So whatever your addiction or your habit or your struggles, the point is that what worked for me was to ask that God take that desire away.
Okay.
And it was immediate.
So here we are 38 years later in a very incredible journey. Starts with some real honesty and some real confrontation. This is the situation I'm in, and then this is the situation we're in. But here 38 years later, in what, a week?
Yep.
On the other side of that.
Yeah. It's the grace of God.
It's the grace of God. And I'm struck by what you said. The key role that having a community like AA played in being able to go through those steps. Step 3 being hugely important. And then continuing the recognition that I can stay on this side of it because of people believing and then coming to that realization yourself.
Yes.
Any closing thoughts? Anything that you guys would like to say to those who are listening? When you're thinking of this journey and what we've been sharing tonight, is there anything else that you would like to say that we haven't said?
It's easy sometimes when people ask me what happened I want to be careful not to leave with anyone the feeling of the pain that endured first, but instead to remember the victory that God gives, because I can never talk about my story without talking about the demons in Mark 5.
Right.
That is, like, I was so happy that Richie talked about that right at the get-go, because that is absolutely what it's like. That those powers are so strong, you can break chains and shackles and everything else to go with yourself will run riot, But that the real story is the amazing understanding and grace of God and the forgiveness and the freedom that he gives, which is unspeakable.
Freedom unspeakable, chains behind and freedom ahead.
Yes.
Karen and Bob, thank you so much for sharing tonight. It's a powerful witness. And friends, I hope that you see that what they've experienced, finding a best friend, first of all, but then coming out on the other side of something that seemed impossible. Thank you again, guys.
Thank you.
Friends, we're going to do this. We're going to have more guests with similar stories of hope for you for the next few nights until each night from now until June 11. Now, if you haven't registered yet, if you haven't texted in, I'm going to put something on the screen for you, and I want you to take a moment. If you want to win an opportunity to win Pastor Richie's book, his own journey from opioid addiction to being unchained from that and how he got there, please consider the number on your screen there, 903-666-4541. Just text the word register to that. We'll take that. You'll be entered for that nightly drawing, and you'll have an opportunity to read Pastor Richie's account of how God, as with Karen and Bob, how God helped him find a way through something that seemed impossible. Now, I'm going to pull up tonight's winner, which I have been texted here, and tonight's winner is Andrea Ventners. Andrea, you are the winner for tonight. Thank you for registering. We will contact you and get that information to you. Friends, if you want more life-changing stories, would you please join us tomorrow night at 7:30? And each night at 7:30 until June 11, we want to encourage you. We want to continue to have you hear accounts that might encourage you to believe there's hope for you too. God bless you. Thank you for tuning in tonight. We hope to see you tomorrow night at 7:30 for Unchained. Take care, friends.